Sonic Riders is a best of many things for the Sonic series. It is the best Sonic game that was released in 2006. It's the best Sonic racing game, I would argue, and I'd even go as far as to say that it is just, in general, the best Sonic spin-off game ever made. I feel like that's not a very controversial opinion, is it? I mean, what's really its competition? Like, Sonic Battle, I guess? I mean, that's a cool game, but I definitely would say that Riders is a lot better and a lot more fun. And in fact, I would also go on to say that, well, maybe not the best, I think it is probably one of the best kart racer type games out there. I mean, I don't know if you'd really even call this a kart racer, but, you know, it's like a mascot cartoon platformer game turned into a racing game. And, you know, within that bracket, I think that it is definitely pretty top tier. Though, unfortunately, that has not led to Sonic Riders becoming like a super beloved and popular, well-known game that everyone's like, oh yeah, Sonic Riders, that game is awesome. Because Sonic Riders suffers from one critical flaw, which is that the game is quite complicated, and it does almost nothing to teach you how to play the game. And so a lot of people, when they first played Sonic Riders, including myself, you just have no fucking idea what the hell is going on or what you're supposed to be doing, and you either figure out how to play the game on your own, or you just completely bounce off it because you're like, what the fuck is this game? Fortunately, I'm very experienced with extremely complicated and in-depth games that don't teach you shit about how to play them. I mean, I play Sonic games for one, lots of them do that. But also, I'm a veteran in many action games and fighting games and stuff. I just have a lot of experience with taking a game that doesn't tell you how to play it and figuring it all out. And unfortunately, many people who aren't really used to that kind of thing, they usually end up bouncing off Sonic Riders hard, going, I don't know what the hell is going on with this game, I don't like it. And that is absolutely not their fault. Games really gotta do a better job of actually teaching the player how to play them, because otherwise players are gonna miss out on a really fun game. So let's kind of break things down a little bit here and figure out how Riders actually works and teach you how to play and actually get into, like, the cool shit with Sonic Riders. Let's start with kicking off a race, the very beginning thing, because this is very emblematic of the entire issue with Sonic Riders and its design as a game. Because in most racing games like this, you'll have like a little starting thing you can do to get a little burst of speed or whatever. Usually you gotta just like time when you hit the gas or something like that. So naturally, people coming to this game that have played stuff like Mario Kart, they're gonna naturally expect something similar to that for Sonic Riders. But that is not at all how this game works. The start of the race is fairly complicated for the standards of a game like this. It starts with everybody behind the starting line, and you're free to just move around for a couple of seconds before the race starts. And if you want, you can just go ahead and cross the starting line and begin racing. However, there is that electric fence there that's going to prevent you from starting the race early. And there's this green line that trails forward that tells you the exact moment that the race is going to begin, to try to help you kind of time when you hit the starting line, because that's what you really want to do. You want to run up to the starting line and build up as much speed as you can, so that way the moment the race starts, you just immediately cross the starting line with a ton of speed. So you have to try to time when the race is going to start and how long it's going to take for you to accelerate and run up to the starting line and then cross it and start racing. But also, there's another layer there, because the amount of speed that you're running with does translate into the burst you get once you start racing. So if you take a couple of steps backward, then you have more room and more time to accelerate, which will give you an even bigger burst of speed. So it becomes this very fine balancing act where you have to back up to give yourself as much time and opportunity to speed up as possible, while at the same time you want to time it so that you cross the starting line at the very exact moment that the race begins, because if you do it too late, then you're going to be falling behind everybody else, but if you do it too early, then you're going to hit the electric fence. It's a really, really cool way to start a race. Honestly, it's like the best race start that I've ever seen in any racing game I've ever played. But also, why is this so freaking complicated? Who the hell is gonna figure this out on their own when they first start playing this game? Answer, nobody. Especially for, you know, a Sonic the Hedgehog spin-off racing game, you would not necessarily expect such in-depth mechanics in the gameplay of what you expect to be just like a Mario Kart clone, but Sonic Riders is no Mario Kart clone, and this same type of relatively complex and thoughtful gameplay is all over the place in Sonic Riders, and it's really awesome, but extremely confusing to anyone who is just picking up the game for the first time. At least without some help from someone explaining how the game works, so let's get back into that. Once you actually start racing, then the game starts to feel pretty similar to a typical racing game. You automatically move forward in this, kinda Kirby Air Ride style, and you just have to steer left and right. And there's also a drift that you can do, and after drifting for a couple of seconds, then you're gonna get a little speed boost. Alright, pretty standard, makes sense, no problems there. And this game also takes a bit of a cue from Sonic Heroes, because you have every character split into either a speed, flight, or power type, who can all take unique shortcuts that only their type can take. Speed characters are able to grind on rails, flight characters are able to go off these ramps and fly through hoops, and power characters are able to smash through obstacles to take specific shortcuts. That's a pretty cool idea, I like that. I like incorporating the character abilities into the mechanics of the game instead of basically just making them all skins from each other. And actually, now that I think about it, Sonic Riders takes a couple of things from Sonic Heroes, because it's also a game that's fairly complicated and does an incredibly poor job of teaching you how to play the game. But the real complicated stuff with Sonic Riders starts to come in when we talk about how boosting works in this game. Because you are free to boost whenever you want. You can just hit the button and your character will get a big burst of speed that lasts for a couple seconds. But of course, just being able to boost freely with no effort is not really something that's gonna fly. You need some kind of system in the game to limit how you're able to do these things. And that is where the air meter on the right side of the screen starts to come into play. Basically, air governs everything you can do in Sonic Riders. You have to constantly be managing the air meter and making sure you have enough air to do what you want, and taking actions to build up your air so that way you can spend it later to speed yourself up. In fact, just riding around, that takes up air, a very, very small amount, but if you start to run dry, you will eventually just run out of air and have to start running on foot, which actually in this game is slower than being on your extreme gear, which, Sonic, why are they slower than vehicles? Whatever, I don't give a shit. It's a video game, just go with it. And if you do run out of air, then you can go to one of these pit stops and that will automatically fill you up, but it also means just sitting there and falling behind in the race, so obviously that's not something you want to do. So naturally you want to avoid running out of air as much as possible, but at the same time you want to spend as much air as you can boosting in order to speed yourself up to give yourself a better shot at winning the race. Drifting is also something that can eat up quite a bit of air, so you want to make sure you have enough to do that as well around tight corners. You can also use a big chunk of air to leave a tornado behind, which will catch racers behind you as a trap, but when you're playing single player, that's something that you, never do. And you can build up air in a couple of different ways. For one, taking your character's type shortcuts, that will build air. Grinding on rails, flying, or smashing things, that's one easy way that you can build air, but the primary way you build air in Sonic Riders is by doing tricks off of ramps. This is another one of the things in the game that is not very intuitive just based on your natural assumptions of how to play a cartoony kart racer type game like this. Because how would you go off a ramp in a racing game like this? You would expect you just hit the jump button when you're going off the ramp, but that is actually not what you're supposed to do. Because in Sonic Riders, you can charge your jump by holding the button, and then you jump when you release the button, and that is how you get yourself the best jump off of a ramp. You want to charge leading up to the ramp and let go as you go off of it, so that way you will fly as high and far and quickly as possible, and while you're in the air, you can move the analog stick in various directions to do a bunch of tricks. And once you hit the ground, you will be awarded with an amount of air based on how many tricks you did while airborne. And it's important to note that you also do have to stick the landing when doing tricks. If you're doing a trick while you hit the ground, then you're going to mess it up and you're going to get a really bad rank and barely any air, and it's going to kill your speed. So that's just another element where Sonic Riders is a very, pushing yourself as far as possible kind of game. You want to squeeze as many tricks in there as you possibly can, but at the same time, you don't want to do too many tricks and then mess up and then lose everything that you were trying to build. That can really screw you over in the race, because now you don't have the air that you were expecting to have, and now you can't boost around, now you can't take those tight corners, and it's just going to cause you a whole bunch of problems. Also, boosting functions as your way to attack opponents as well. If you boost into another racer, then you're going to attack them, and that will not only slow down the opponent, but it will also refund the air you spend doing the boost. There are also these set-piece sequences here that you can also use to fill air, where you spin the stick around as quickly as possible to gain air, which are not particularly great. I'm not a big fan of these things, because this is just stupid gameplay. How quickly I can spin the analog stick is not a representation of how good I am at the game, so I find it very stupid that you reward people for being good at that. Another mechanic of Sonic Riders is turbulence. This is this game's catch-up mechanic, where the person in first place is going to leave these weird wind trail things for racers behind them, and you can ride on the turbulence and use that to gain air and pick up speed and stuff. But it's very awkward. It's a mechanic that doesn't really work super well a lot of the time, and again, for new players, this is just going to be really confusing. You're not going to know what the hell is happening or what you're supposed to do on these things. But basically the way it works is you can move left and right on them and go toward the arrows to launch yourself up into the air to automatically do tricks to gain air, and that'll also speed you up. And in fact, there's also some shortcuts that you can sometimes take, taking advantage of turbulence, where it will launch you into an area that you can't get to any other way, which is pretty cool. But to be honest, turbulence is a pretty bad comeback mechanic, and I oftentimes just try to avoid it. You can exit turbulence whenever you want by doing the tornado input, and you can also just not get in it if you're drifting, so you can intentionally drift through turbulence to avoid it if you want to, which is what I often opt to do. I think turbulence is a cool idea of a mechanic, but it definitely needs some fine-tuning to fix the issues. Oh yeah, another thing about going off ramps is that while you're charging, before you let go of the button, you can either hold forward or back, and that will change the trajectory that the ramp is going to launch you on. Holding forward will make it launch you further, and holding back will make it launch you higher, and you can actually use these to get yourself to different areas of the map where you can take different routes for shortcuts. Because, you know, this game didn't have enough mechanics that it didn't tell you about, and there's actually a lot of shortcuts and alternate routes available in Sonic Riders, which is pretty cool. And, you know, honestly, with this whole, like, the type shortcuts, all the different routes you can take, they did a good job of making this actually feel like a Sonic game, and not just a random racing game that they just shoved Sonic's name onto for brand recognition, which I definitely appreciate. And another interesting thing about Sonic Riders is that there's a good chunk of shortcuts in this game that don't actually speed you up. They actually take longer to do, which doesn't really make any sense in the context of a typical racing game. But oftentimes in Sonic Riders, the paths that you can take that slow you down are there to give you a chance to refill your air, like type shortcuts and stuff, where it's going to have you grinding on this rail that goes all the way around in this extra area that doesn't actually get you to the end faster. It's there to be an opportunity to refill your air. So it's like, do you want to go the fast way, or do you want to go the way that's going to give you more air? Depending on the situation, you're going to have to think about what the best thing to do is, which is pretty cool as opposed to most racing games where you just always take the fastest path. But if all that wasn't enough, there's a whole other system in this game as well, because of course this is a Sonic game, which means there are spray paint cans all over the place for you to pick up. And these are very interesting in how they impact the gameplay. I really like this. This is kind of another thing that this game takes from Sonic Heroes, leveling up. Every time you get 30 cans, you will level up to the next level, and that will increase your stats. But most importantly, it will increase the speed and duration of your boost, and it will extend the length of your air meter, allowing you to stock up even more air for use later. And leveling up in and of itself will automatically fill your entire air meter, which is just another thing to consider in terms of how you want to spend and use your meter in order to optimize your play. You can run into situations where it's okay to completely run dry and spend everything that you have as far as air goes, as long as you can collect cans, and that will push you over to the next level and you'll instantly refill everything. It's a really cool thing to consider. And this is what I'm talking about. There's so many layers to Sonic Riders gameplay that you would not expect when you just hear Sonic Kart Racer minigame Mario Kart ripoff type thing. This game is so, like, over-designed, but I don't mean that in a bad way. I love the depth of the mechanics here and how much stuff there is to think about. it's a lot to just throw at someone right off the bat. And I think this is the major thing that makes Sonic Riders a difficult game for people to figure out when they first start playing, is like the air meter is something that when you first start playing, you might not even really notice it's there. You know, it's all the way off to the side and it's kind of small and you're focused on the race, on the track in front of you and all that. So when you first start playing the game, you're just racing like a normal racing game and you're not really doing very well because you don't understand the mechanics, and then you run out of air and you start running around and you're doing horrible tricks and messing up all the time. And the game just feels like complete trash when you don't know what you're doing. But it's once you learn how to play Sonic Riders and how it works and what you're supposed to be doing that you realize that this game is quite interesting and pretty cool. Because the core of Sonic Riders is really all about that resource management, that meter management, trying to make the most out of your air as you possibly can. This is a game that you want to ride on the razor's edge as much as possible, using your air to the absolute maximum to speed yourself up as much as you can, and taking every single opportunity to refill your air and maximizing all of those opportunities so that way you have as much air as possible to speed yourself up even further. It's a very delicate balance of gains and losses. You want to spend, spend, spend in order to speed yourself up, but you also need to take time and effort to make sure you don't spend too much and go bankrupt, and then you run out of air, and now everything is falling apart. And all of that sits on top of a pretty solid racing game with fun tracks and good gameplay. The feel of Sonic Riders is so insanely good. The controls on this game are just magnificent. I honestly cannot overstate how good this game feels to play. Turning and your speed and movement, everything feels great. Drifting in particular is so nice in this game. You can just use like little tiny baby drifts in order to readjust your movement direction just slightly, and it's just so good. When you get into this game and you really feel it out, wow, it feels really good to play. Personally, as someone that can learn how to play complex games on their own, I will any day of the week take a really involved and complicated game over something really basic and easy that's very approachable, because usually basic and easy games don't really have the meat to really stand up as something that you want to play a whole lot. Something like Sonic Riders has a much higher skill ceiling than your typical kart racer game out there, and because of that, there's a lot to dig into here and a lot of fun to be had. And I also think that Sonic Riders has a fairly decent amount of content. There are 18 tracks in the game that I think are pretty well designed and pretty fun for the most part. Though, to be fair, half of the tracks are kind of just like variants of the single track. Like, you have this Frozen Factory here, which is just a variant of the Lava Factory stage. They're not exact carbon copies of each other, but they do reuse assets. Some of these stages are entirely different, but some of them are also fairly similar. Though, to be honest, I kind of like this in a way, because it almost feels like zones from, like, typical Sonic games. Again, just another thing that actually makes this feel like a proper Sonic game in a way. There's a story mode you can play through, which is basically just playing through a bunch of the tracks in the game, but with cutscenes in between, which, sure, whatever, I guess is fine. I really think they should have had a tutorial in here. Like, the story mode should have been the method that the game uses to teach you how to play, instead of just throwing you into the deep end immediately, but whatever. There is a tutorial video in the game teaching you how to play, but it's buried deep in a bunch of menus, which essentially guarantees that nobody is going to see that prior to actually just starting to play the game. There's also a Grand Prix mode, which takes 5 of the tracks from the game, and you just play them all in one sequence, and your score tallies up across all the races, you know, that kind of typical thing. You know, it's a racing game, so pretty much the majority of what there is to do is to race. That's pretty much the game. There is the mission mode, where you have a bunch of, like, individual challenges to do on the tracks, but to be honest, this mode kinda sucks. It's pretty boring. A lot of these missions are very uninteresting, or very basic, or just not particularly fun, or whatever. I wouldn't really recommend doing this, which is unfortunate because this is how you unlock a bunch of shit in the game, because on top of having all the different characters of their different stats and stuff, you also have a whole bunch of different gears that you can unlock through the game. You unlock gears in the mission mode, as well as buying them in the shop with the cans you collect while playing the game, which is pretty cool. But to be honest, a lot of these gears don't really change up the gameplay that much overall. Like, they do a couple of cool things here and there, but for the most part, you can throw on one of these gears, and I wouldn't really be able to tell that much of a difference in terms of how it changes how you play. But that is where we now start talking about the actual way that I recommend playing Sonic Riders, because you should definitely not play vanilla-based Sonic Riders at all anymore. There is no reason to play it these days, because some modders have taken Sonic Riders, which was already a solid and fun racing game, and have taken it to the next level and turned it into a really fucking awesome game, with 2 mods available for it, Sonic Riders DX and Sonic Riders Tournament Edition. If you're going to be playing Sonic Riders, you should absolutely be playing one of these 2 versions of the game. These things are freaking awesome. So awesome, in fact, that I actually do want to dive into these and talk about what they do to the game and how they change it up and all the stuff they add, because it's really, really cool. Starting with DX, there's a whole bunch of extra music that's been added to the game, and a lot of these tracks are really, really sick. Very good picks all around the board, so that's pretty nice. Rather than just having to listen to the base Sonic Riders soundtrack all the time, you get a much more varied soundtrack playing these versions of the game, which is nice. But much more significantly is Sonic Riders DX adds extra playable characters. It adds Metal Sonic, Silver, and Chaos into the game, which is extremely cool that that's even possible to add new characters to a game like this. And additionally, Sonic Riders DX adds skins to the game for every character, and a lot of these are really, really cool. There's a lot of deep-cut references in here that I can appreciate. Additionally, DX comes with the ability to play in the Japanese voices, which is not available in the original GameCube version of the game, and it even has a Japanese voice option available for Silver, which is really cool that they bother to go the extra mile for that. I really appreciate that. Also, the entire HUD and UI of the game has been completely redone, and new character art and everything, and some of the levels have had textures redone to change up how they look. Might not be to everybody's liking, but I think it's pretty cool. Additionally, a lot of the gears in the game have been completely redesigned and rebalanced to make them more interesting, play more differently from each other, make them more viable competitively, because that's really what the focus of these mods is supposed to be, is turning Riders into a competitive game. So there's a lot of changes to make them function more viably as kind of an actual versus game with like real balance and stuff. But that really just results in the game being better overall, so it's a win for everybody, not just competitive players. And a lot of these gear changes are really, really cool and creative. I like a lot of what these do. There's some really crazy stuff in here, like a gear that can now go up to level 4 when you get 90 cans. That's like ridiculously, insanely powerful. You have a gear that can't boost at all, but instead when you leave tornadoes behind, that will give you a burst of speed, so you spend the whole race just leaving tornadoes all over the place for other racers to run into. That's a neat idea. And a whole bunch of other cool stuff like that. And oh yeah, I forgot to mention, eventually in Sonic Riders you can unlock Super Sonic, which is pretty cool. He's like an Omni-type character that's super OP and stuff, which is neat, but he's been slightly reworked in DX to be actually fair, and on top of that, DX has also added Super Tails, Super Knuckles, Super Amy, Super Shadow, Hyper Sonic, and Neo Metal Sonic, who can also turn into a super state, all into the game, and they all have different mechanics and systems to how they work, and a whole bunch of shit. On top of all that cool stuff, some of the tracks have been slightly reworked with new type shortcuts or reworked things to make it more balanced and more competitively viable and stuff. They have gotten rid of the capsules that instantly give you 100 cans or instantly fill all your air, as those were pretty dumb and obviously are very bad for a competitive environment. The stupid set pieces where you spin the stick have been completely removed from the game. Now you just fly through these ultra fast just to skip them, and you don't have to spin anymore. You just automatically basically get your air refilled entirely, which is much better because that shit was stupid. They've added the ability to jump while running on foot, which was a problem in the original game. It left you way too helpless if you ended up running on foot with no air, but this actually lets you kind of do tricks and regain your air and kind of get your footing back. Another thing they've added to DX that's really cool is they've made it so that every character can use every gear in the game, because in the original Sonic Riders, some characters couldn't use some types of gears, because you had the boards, the skates, and motorcycles, and some characters like Eggman could only ride a motorcycle, or some characters can only ride on gears or whatever. But they found a way in DX to make it so that every character can use every type of gear, which is great. Basically, DX does an unimaginably gigantic amount of cool stuff to the game, but I don't want to just stop there. I didn't want to be just someone that was like, hey, check this out, it's pretty cool. Look, you can play as Silver and Metal Sonic in Sonic Riders, and then just call it a day there. I actually wanted to try to, learn how to play these more advanced mods for Sonic Riders, and what do they actually do to the game's mechanics and gameplay to make it more competitive, and actually try to learn how to play Sonic Riders at this new high level available with these mods. And now that I've done that, I have to say, the coolest thing that these mods add to Sonic Riders is by far the gameplay stuff. They take an already really good and fun game, and they push it over the edge to insanely awesome and one of the best racing games I've ever played in my life. So, first of all, going back to the character select, you might see on DX that we have these symbols in the top right corner of the characters. Those are the subclasses of the characters. In addition to having your unique type with your type shortcuts, they have also added subtypes to every character that make them all slightly different from each other in various ways. So now every single character in the game plays differently from each other. You have late boosters like Sonic, who get a buff to their boost when they hit levels 2 and 3. You have early boosters like Knuckles, who get a buff to their boosts early on, as well as having a buff to a specific mechanic that I'll talk about later. You have drifters that are better at turning. You have top speed characters that are faster than everybody else. You have all-rounders that have a little bit of everything somewhat. And you have performance characters who have the fastest boost speed in the game. I think that's generally how it works. I'm pretty sure there's other minute differences between the classes, but that's kind of the overview of things. And you have basically a character of every class in every type. So if you want the top speed character, you play as Jet. And then this adds to the whole decision-making of the game of picking the track as well as the extreme gear you're going to use and what synergizes the best. Also, it's worth mentioning that they have reworked the character E10000G to be a typeless character, so he does not have speed, flight, or power. He can't take any type shortcuts. But as a trade-off, he has all of the best stats of any character in the game, so that's another interesting consideration there. I can for sure imagine that the actual competitive scene for these games has a whole counter-pick system of, what beats what and what can you pick, Smash Bros. Style, because that's a whole big thing, is just choosing what you're going to use can have a big impact on how quickly you can complete the race. Though generally, after experimenting with a lot of different characters and a lot of different gears and a lot of different tracks, I have felt that things are relatively pretty well balanced. A lot of times, if I played, decently well, then most of my clear times at the end of the race should be pretty much the same. It's worth mentioning that I haven't actually played either of these mods actually competitively against anyone yet. I've just been experimenting and trying to learn stuff single player. So it's very possible that there's a whole extra layer of stuff that I'm not really thinking about here. But now talking about the actual gameplay mechanic changes to the game. The first one is a very minor one that's just a cool little thing, is that when you jump off of rails in the original Sonic Riders, you'd basically lose all of your speed and you do a very slow, shitty jump where you barely go anywhere. But now they've added a mechanic where if you hold the boost button while you're on a rail and then you jump, then your speed from the rail will be preserved, and this can actually be used to take some pretty cool shortcuts. I like that. That's a neat little thing. Also, they've added the Mario Kart style, the longer you drift, then the bigger boost you're going to get at the end of the drift, because originally in Sonic Riders, once you drifted for long enough to get the boost, there was no reason to do it anymore. You should just let go of it and get the drift dash right there, because it doesn't actually increase. Which is another thing that would catch new players off guard because they naturally expect it to work like Mario Kart, and they've added that to DX, and I think that's definitely a good choice. There have been lots of other really small under-the-hood changes to the game and how it works and a bunch of stuff. Like, for example, dash panels no longer set you at an exact value of speed. They now increase your speed by a certain amount. So that means that you're always going to get a benefit from hitting one, whereas in the original Riders, sometimes you would actually get slowed down by hitting one. So that's very nice, and a whole bunch of other small little changes like that. But now we talk about the big change made to Sonic Riders that is like the linchpin of what makes these mods super cool, which is boost chaining. And to be honest, boost chaining feels like a mechanic that just should have been in the game to begin with, and now that it's here, holy shit does it make the game even more fun. What boost chaining is it essentially takes that same property from dash panels where they are now additive to your speed rather than setting it to an exact value, and it applies that to your boost as well. Normally in Sonic Riders, whenever you boost, it would just set your speed to whatever your boost speed is, which always felt like that's not how the game should have worked. Like, I would always just naturally, I would like start drifting around a corner, and right when I would release the drift and I would get the dash, then I would immediately boost and try to combo those two boosts together for an even bigger burst of speed, but that's not actually how the game works. That didn't actually do anything, but now with boost chaining, that works exactly like that. The way to boost chain is to simply boost while drifting. You can still do the normal set value-based boosting just by boosting normally, but if you want to do a boost chain and have an additive boost effect, then you just gotta quickly drift before boosting, which is at first kind of maybe a little bit of an awkward thing to do, but eventually it starts to become really easy and natural where you just hit those two buttons basically at the exact same time, and it's super easy to do. And this completely transforms how Sonic Riders plays. You'd be surprised what one small mechanic can do, but the entire universe opens up to you now with boost chaining because you can hit such a ridiculously high speed in this game, way faster than anything you could achieve in the original Sonic Riders by combining all of these boosts together. Hit a dash panel, boost immediately after that, go even faster. Drift and boost, bam, get a ton of speed. While you're boosting and you have a bunch of speed, the boost ends and you immediately boost again and transfer the speed over. They've even added an effect to boosting that tells you when the boost is about to end to make that easy to do. And this is that other thing that early boosters get that I mentioned before. They get a stronger boost chain effect with a bigger speed boost than other character classes. And just, like, holy shit, dude, all these fucking new mechanics and stuff, especially boost chaining, they all combine together to make a game that is so insanely awesome and so fun. You already have the solid base of Sonic Riders that's already really fun and really cool, and then you add even further layers to it and extra depth on top of that. It's just, oh my god, it's so fun, it's so much faster now, it's so sick, dude. Honestly, after playing these two versions of Sonic Riders, I can say with 100% confidence I am never going to play vanilla Sonic Riders again. Previously, I have said that I think you should play default vanilla Sonic Riders first to learn the basics before moving on to these mods, but now that I've actually played them and kind of learned how to play them, fuck that, just go straight to these things. They are way too cool. And this is just scratching the surface of what you can do in these, because I'm a beginner with this stuff. There's even more advanced mechanics you can do in terms of boost chaining, because when you charge a jump, that will cut your boost short. And so what you can do is do a bunch of boost chains in quick succession by charging a jump while doing it to get a gigantic burst of speed. It does cost a lot of air, and it's a little bit difficult to do input-wise, but it's super cool. I was just barely starting to be able to figure out how to do this kind of stuff by the end of my time with these two mods. And up to this point, while I have been talking about DX, a lot of this stuff also does translate over to Sonic Riders Tournament Edition, because these two mods originally were one mod and then they split at some point, so they have a lot of shared DNA and similar mechanics to them in terms of, like, they both have boost chaining, they both have the subtypes for the characters. A lot of the quality life improvements and changes to the gears are very similar across the two games. But they also do have their differences. For example, Tournament Edition adds 3 additional playable characters as of recording of this video. They have Tikal, Blaze, and Emerald, and Emerald is a particularly cool character because he is not normally of a type. He has no type by default, but when he attacks other racers or trails behind them, then he will copy their type and be able to do what they do. Now, isn't that just fucking awesome and so true to the character? You love seeing stuff like that. Also, the subclasses have kind of been rearranged around a little bit, and Amy has been moved over to a power character, as well as having a lot of gears that are balanced a little bit differently in Tournament Edition compared to how they're balanced in DX, just slightly different stats or abilities or effects depending on the gear. Some of them work completely differently depending on which one. Also, instead of the Performance class, TE has the Boost class, which can maintain their boost through actions that normally would cancel out your boost, like jumping or going into the air or something like that. It also adds Trickster characters who can do a whole bunch of tricks in the air much faster than other characters, and they also have this enhanced jump that they can do where they can jump forward with a big burst of speed. Oh yeah, by the way, Tournament Edition also does have extra super forms similar to what DX does, but it doesn't have the exact same ones. Hypersonic is in the game, but that's just because he's a reskin of Supersonic. There's no longer Supersonic in Tournament Edition, and it does have Super Tails, Knuckles, Shadow, and Neo Metal Sonic, though no Super Amy in this, and all of these characters have totally different mechanics than the ones that they have in DX. And Tournament Edition does not have the skin feature that DX has. A couple of characters have one skin that you can use, for example, this Nazo skin for Sonic, but there's only like 2 characters, I think, that have it. And also, while it does have the ability to use Japanese voices, the new characters currently do not have support for that, which is unfortunate. Also, unfortunately, Tournament Edition does not support every character using every type of gear like DX does, and I know that so far it kind of just sounds like Tournament Edition is missing a lot of the cool features available in DX. It does have extra characters, but it's also missing a lot of cool stuff, but what Tournament Edition does have is quite a bit of new gameplay mechanics in the core gameplay that I think are pretty neat. First of all, another mechanic I forgot to mention in the DX section that both these mods have is drafting, where if you follow behind someone, then you're going to gain speed, which is pretty neat for Sonic Riders, because you can leave tornadoes behind, so it's kind of like a risk-reward kind of thing. It's like, oh, it's dangerous. Do you really want to trail behind someone? It might not be a good idea. But Tournament Edition also adds a cool feature where if you kind of skim just past an enemy's tornado, then you get a speed boost if you take that extra risk, kind of like a bullet hell type game. But Tournament Edition has also added an entirely new comeback mechanic in the form of Magnetic Impulse, which as you fall behind from first place, you will passively gain a buff that increases the amount of speed and air you get from the stage gimmicks, like dash panels and ramps and stuff. Which I think is a pretty cool idea, because as it is, the comeback mechanics that exist in Riders, they require you to, like, be right up behind your opponent, but if you fall behind too far, then you don't have anything to work with. You're going to be too far behind for drafting to work, and Turbulence is oftentimes just not really very good in general. Which, by the way, both of these mods have also added a way to just completely avoid Turbulence, which is very nice. Also, in case it's not clear, Tournament Edition does not have the thing where the longer you drift, then the stronger drift dash you're going to get when you release it. That's something that's only in DX as of right now. Another mechanic that's been added to Tournament Edition that, honestly, I've never really figured out how to incorporate intentionally into my play is that if you get an S rank specifically after doing a bunch of tricks, then you get a big speed boost, so it kind of gives you incentive to aim for the S rank as opposed to going for higher ranks to get extra air. You can intentionally choose to do less tricks and get less air, but have more speed. That's a pretty cool idea, though I'm not really good enough to know exactly how many tricks it takes to do an S rank, so I never really incorporated it into my play. Anyway, there's some other cool stuff that Tournament Edition has added. For example, you can now spend air while grinding and flying to increase your speed while doing these actions, which is very, very interesting because normally these are actions that build you air, and so, like, the way you route the level is, like, these are opportunities to refill air to speed yourself up later. But now you have an opportunity to rethink these things to now you can speed yourself up here at the cost of them no longer giving you air, but now costing it. It's just another layer to that risk-reward Sonic Riders play of air versus speed. It definitely fits with the general design philosophy of the game, and I think it's pretty cool. And additionally, along with that, you can also spend air while doing tricks in the air in order to force yourself to kind of fast fall, Smash Bros. Style, which again is just another way for you to think about trading off air for speed, because not only does it cost air to fall faster, but it also means you're going to be in the air for less time, giving you less time to do tricks, so you won't be able to accumulate as much air, so is it really worth it to speed up your descent and hit the ground faster? Maybe it's not. But then along with that, they've added another cool new feature, which is a perfect landing, where if you hit a button right as you hit the ground, it doesn't matter if you're doing a trick or not, you'll always land it, and you'll get to keep all of the speed and air and tricks that you got. And the timing for this is fairly tight. It's a little bit risky to go for, so it's like a serious thing that you need to consider. Do you want to try to push it extra and get some extra tricks in there for even more air at the risk of maybe messing up the timing and totally fucking over everything? Maybe it's better to just play it safe, but at the same time, you'll get even more air, and that will speed you up even further. And then you can combine that with the fast fall to really make it an interesting choice, because with the fast fall you get less time to do tricks, but then you can squeeze in an extra trick or two if you manage to hit the perfect landing. But also, because you're fast falling, the timing that you're going to hit the ground is now wildly inconsistent. It's not like most of the time where you can kind of just learn the timing of the jumps, because the longer you hold down the button, the faster you accelerate down to the ground. So it's kind of really difficult to like exactly predict the moment you're going to hit the ground to time it. So it's kind of a risky thing to do. But it also gives you the best of both worlds. It speeds up your descent and gives you extra tricks for even more air. It's a really interesting risk versus reward option. You can choose to throw it all away, and if you're good enough, you get to come out the other side better than you were before. But if you mess it up, oof, you are completely screwed due to your own hubris. I really, really like that. Just like these mods in general do for Sonic Riders, these extra mechanics just take an already really cool and interesting game and make it even more cool and even more interesting. They raise the skill ceiling up higher, give you more things to think about. I'm a really big fan of it. And I'm sure you're wondering, now that I've played both DX and Tournament Edition, which version of the game do I think is the definitive Sonic Riders and which is better? And to be honest, I really can't pick one. I like both mods a lot. I think that they both do really cool, interesting new stuff to Sonic Riders, and I think they're both worth playing. I will say that I think that DX is a more well put together and kind of nice mod with all of its extra cool features and the skins and the Japanese voices available for the new characters, the ability to use every single gear with every character. You know, there's a lot of really cool stuff there, but at the same time, Tournament Edition does add those extra playable characters, and it does have really cool gameplay additions that I really, really like. It's honestly a really tough pick, but thankfully, I don't have to pick. I can just play both games perfectly happily. And my recommendation for you, if you want to play Sonic Riders, would be to check out both mods and see which one is more to your preference. Again, it is worth mentioning that I've not actually played either of these mods in their intended setting as an actual competitive game played against human beings, so I can't say anything about, like, the balance or how it actually ends up working as a competitive game. Who knows? If I actually played them in that setting, I might realize that one is horribly imbalanced and is terrible or whatever. I don't know. I've just played them single player, and that's the only context that I have to work with, so maybe you can disregard everything I'm saying here. I don't know. You know what? Here's how I'll decide which one of these mods I think is the better one and is the definitive Sonic Riders experience. They're both working on adding more new characters to the game. The first one that can add everyone's favorite Sonic character, Zavok, to the game, that's the definitive Sonic Riders experience for sure. Honestly, it's a crime that neither of them have added the fan-favorite Zavok to the game. I mean, like, Metal Sonic Blaze? Why on earth would you waste your time with lame-ass characters like that when we could have fucking Zavok, or maybe even Zaz? Think of how cool that would be. So there you go, there's Sonic Riders and its two really cool competitive mods. A really good game that's been made even better by fans. Never heard that before for a Sonic game. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time.